1/25 f1.8 ISO 125. Okay, and shoot a couple of minutes. mm 1.4 and the 35mm 1.8S. In this day and age, there are no choices that are bad. There are just different levels of good. What Nikon have given us with the 35 1.8 and 1.4 is choice. The choice to go in one direction or another. Is low light more important to you than image fidelity? Or is it more about image fidelity and you can sacrifice just a very small amount of light gathering capability and just a very small amount of short depth of field? It's a choice. It's an option. But in this video, what I want to show you is that in the real world, when we look at things full frame, when we look at them on a TV screen, whether it be moving or still, whether it's on Instagram or Facebook, whether it's on a wall as part of a canvas, a piece of art, these are the ways that we really look at images. We're not pixel peeping. In this video, that's what we're going to do. We're going to look at images real-world style, just like the images are real-world style, and you can decide for yourself. Are you a 35mm 1.8 or a 35mm 1.4 type of person? We can talk specs until we're blue in the face, but really, what does it matter? Did you capture the shot? And is the shot any good? If you're really keen to see both of these two lenses a little bit closer up, we'll have a quick look in Capture One at a couple of samples, and we will explore how these lenses differ. All right. Alrighty. Well, here we are with the 35mm 1.4, and now we're shooting on the 35mm 1.8. You probably couldn't hear me before, but you can probably hear me now. With all of the AI noise reduction, there is a lot of fans and noise and steam. It's very Blade Runner here. Both of these lenses are fun in these conditions. And here we are with the 35 1.8S. We're now on the 35 1.4. Is there a difference in this type of shot? We're shooting with the on-camera mics. There is a lot of loud air conditioners around. We're using AI sound noise reduction. Some sort of audio will be coming through, but it's probably compromised. But yeah, both of these lenses are doing a great job if you're a family, tourist, just having fun. Can't go wrong with either of them.
All right, well, here we are having a look at the images just a little bit closer so that we can give you some hard information for those that like to pixel peep a little bit more. And we will find that there is absolutely differences between these lenses, and it's just a matter of you making your choice. And on the top, we have the 1.4, and on the bottom, we have the 1.8. Now let's go in and have a look at center sharpness. And we're going to go to 100% because I think going beyond 100% is not useful in a lot of situations. Now, if we look very carefully at these black dots on the poster, what I see is more contrast and slightly more sharpness. Now, contrast contributes to the perception of sharpness, but I also think there's a genuine sharpness difference. Now, we can also see here the difference in light gathering. It's most obvious to my eye over here in the lighter areas. The 1.4, the settings are the same. We are ISO 100 at a shutter of 1/4 of a second or 1/4 for both of them, and then the separate apertures for the two of them, 1.4 and 1.8. So that is why this is brighter. Now, what else do we see going on here in the corner? And we'll just go in one more step. This is the corner, right? That's the corner, hard in the corner. So we're getting a real sense of what goes on in the corner of these lenses when they're wider open. Clearly, the 1.8 is sharper. Really nothing much we can say about that. And that's part of what you're paying for. Now, of course, with the 1.4, you go down to f2, f2.8, and all of this starts to change, and these two lenses will start to become similar. And thus, it's not that the 1.4 can't be sharper in the corners and can't be sharper, you just have to stop it down. You can't shoot it wide open. So don't think it can't be sharp. It can be. When we look at these images as a whole, as you might look at them on your mobile phone or even on a computer screen, or even as quite a large print, and really, let's go to 50%, and this is quite large at this point in time. My screen is 32 inches wide, and we are recording this at 4K. In real world terms, are they that different? I don't think they are that different, but if you didn't have side by side like this is, you might not really notice. The 1.8 is on top, the 1.4 is on the bottom, and we're looking again at sharpness a little bit out of the center. We go to 100% here, and if you look at the rope, there's clear differences between these images. And also, if we look at the street sign behind, again, clearly different. Both lenses are wide open. We've got 1.8 and 1.4 on the bottom, but clear differences in sharpness. And again, to reiterate, if we stop down the 1.4 to 2.0 or 2.8, you will see this sharpness increase. Now, obviously, that is not a problem when you are on a tripod. You can make these sort of changes for this sort of use case. Doesn't really impact things, unless, of course, you want that short depth of field. So as a craftsperson in the field, what we do is we juggle our equipment, its settings, and knowing how it performs, we get the result that we're actually looking for. And if we're looking for a result that our gear does not present, then that is when you might consider getting different gear. Ultimately, what I want to say about these two lenses is the differences between them are minor, and the corrections required to bring them to being similar, not the same. The S lens clearly has some advantages when it comes to its coatings, but you can get them pretty close to each other. This, though, is a clear example of how the 1.8S lenses perform very well wide open, even in the corners. And we're very close. We're in the corner at this point in time. And we can see that the level of sharpness here on this ring and up here is very different to the 1.4 and is very good. And again, to repeat, this is what the Z mount and the S lenses are all about. The fact that you can use them wide open and still get results this good. And that's pretty impressive from my perspective. Otherwise, the other obvious thing to me in this image is if we look in the dark areas here, we can very clearly see the difference in light gathering. Now, the light that was over here is changing color. So that's why this one is bluer and this one is more magenta-y. That's because it was changing color. But there, the sky we are clearly collecting more light. And that might be more important to you than anything else. Okay, the 1.8 on the top, the 1.4 on the bottom, and again, these have the same ISO and shutter speed. The light gathering differences are very clear here. If we look at this door area, obviously one is brighter than the other. But depth of field, if we have a look over here in this part of the frame, very clear difference in what's going on in the background there. Now, preference, it's subjective as to which you might prefer. Some people might prefer the background bokeh of the 1.8 and some might prefer the 1.4, or the fact that it's just more out of focus. And then down the front here we have the bin, both at 67%, look pretty good. But clearly to my eye, once again, the 1.8 wide open looks very sharp. This is in the corner of the frame. It's looking really good. And the 1.4 is softer. So very clear what's going on and the difference between these lenses. Here is an image where I want to show you how we can bring the 1.4 file closer to the 1.8 file. We're going to go into 200%. We're going to work here in the back. Clearly see the differences here in brightness. I think we can also see contrast. What I'm going to do is bring the 1.4 down by 2/3 of a stop and try and make it match. The exposures should be roughly the same at this point, and they do look very similar. I think we can see a little bit of difference in that contrast or micro contrast. So I want to play with using our clarity slider here. The idea of this slider is to, I think, bring more contrast to the frame in specific areas. And structure does a similar thing. So if we apply those two just very gently, if we look at that sign now, the two look very similar. Now let me just toggle off, on, off, on. So look, I think that's a pretty good result at making them look quite similar and also taking into account the exposure difference. And there it is. I mean, honestly, if you did not have these two side by side, they look extraordinarily similar. 1.8 is at the top, 1.4 is at the bottom. Real world viewing, even if we go into something like 50%, where in real terms, for my eyes, even on this screen, we are looking at it being 4K and something like 28 inches wide. There really is not a lot of a difference between these lenses. There really isn't at this sort of viewing size, viewing angle, and DPI. Now, of course, a print has more DPI, and thus, theoretically, I suppose it has more information for us to be able to see whether it's good or bad. But there are a whole lot of factors that come into play, like lighting, the texture of the surface. Is there glass or isn't there glass? Do you wear glasses? What is your distance and viewing angle, and so on? So I think we can safely say if you did something like a 3-foot, 1 meter print of these files, you would see the difference at that size, I think. Maybe just, only just. There are a few things I do need to point out, though, that are going on in this file. So let's start in the middle. And yes, I believe that in the middle, sharpness is pretty similar. The 1.4 at the bottom, the 1.8 at the top. They're pretty similar. Side by side, yes, like this, there might be a marginal difference. But then when the depth of field starts to change, as we can see here, we haven't gone back very far. We might have gone back like 1 foot, 30 centimeters, maybe slightly further. And we can already see the difference in sharpness. And I also think there might be a little bit of micro contrast in that, and there might also just be a little general lens sharpness in that. So that's a mixture of potentially 3 different things, making this clearly sharper and softer. Like that's quite a clear difference. Now, these files have been adjusted slightly to make them match from an exposure perspective. For some reason, I shot the f1.8 at a third of a second and the f1.4 at a quarter of a second. I'm not sure why that happened, but they've now been balanced from an exposure perspective because it makes what we're doing here easier on our brains. What's particularly interesting about this image that we're looking at 200%, we've got the 1.8 at the top, the 1.4 below, is that we've got flaring, ghosting, green fringing, purple fringing, and it's all happening in the one spot. Now, if we look at the 1.8 here at the top, there is this flare, this gentle, very soft flare coming from this very bright light source sitting across here. Absolutely. But I would call that pleasing and more natural. If we look at the 1.4, this is a very different outcome where the flaring is quite small, but we have, I suppose, a spherical aberration or a coma aberration. We certainly have distortion that we don't find on the 1.8, coupled with some purple fringing just to add to that. Now, of course, some of these things can be corrected, like the purple fringing. That has largely gotten rid of it. Now, both of them display some green fringing, and to my eye, it looks like it's stronger with the 1.4. But it's interesting, neither of them are perfect. It's quite a different result, and that is all about coatings and optical formulas as to why we end up in this situation. So that's really interesting from my perspective, and something to note in this very harsh condition that I have created here. Now, the other thing that I wanted to talk about with these two lenses is they are not the same field of view. Now, is this a big deal? I don't really think so. We see this all the time across all manufacturers. There are different fields of views between manufacturers, and there are different fields of views within the same manufacturer. This is a common occurrence. Now, I have looked on the tech specs, and they are both rated at the same field of view when I look at, say, B&H's website, which is a 63-degree field of view. Now, clearly that's not the case. Obviously, the field of view that we see between some lenses actually changes in the lens due to focus breathing. Now, because these two lenses are focused at the same point, I would like to think that they would have the same field of view when they're at the same distance, but that may not always be the case. This is pretty common in the industry. It's not a game changer. It's not the end of the world. I know there's a very small, very, very small group of people who would like there to be drama around anything, but this is just a lens, and as a photographic craftsperson, it's our job to make it work. And also, it's just not the way I do business. I'm going to point it out to you, and you can decide for yourself, because everybody's use case is different. And even in my use case, where I want a lens to be what it is, well, it is, strangely, guess what? It is what it is. The 1.8, as we can see, we've got a bit of an R and an O here. We don't have it on the 1.4. And if we go over to the other side of the frame, we have the gas piping and infrastructure that brings the natural gas into the cafe so they can cook us breakfast on the 1.8, but we do not have that on the 1.4. The 1.8 is just a smidge wider, and if we look across the frame, maybe it's something like a 3 to 5% difference. I haven't measured it. It's not a big difference. And when you're just looking at the frame like we are now, it doesn't really jump out. But they are both 35mm lenses, and it is something to be aware of, that one is slightly wider than the other. Now, I have no idea if neither of them are actually 35mm, or one of them is right and one of them is off. I don't know. And the reason I don't know is because they're both stated at 63 degrees. On the B&H website. And there it is, everybody. This is the 35mm 1.4 versus the 35mm 1.8. It's very clear to me that these lenses are made for specific use cases and specific budgets. When Nikon brought us the Z mount, they brought us a brand new paradigm. So from my perspective, applying F mount thinking to the Z mount it doesn't make sense to me because the mount is so different. It's almost 1 centimeter larger, which means that the area of the mount as a whole is significantly larger. What this allows for is completely new optical formulas, and from those formulas, it meant a new range of lenses, a new plan. Nikon would have asked themselves the question, how can we best exploit this mount, as opposed to, let's just make it the same lineup as the F mount. That would have never have been the plan. And of course, the fruit that has been born from this decision and this change has been lenses like the Noct, the 85 and the 50 1.2, the 135 1.8 Plena, and of course, from the best of my understanding, all lenses have been affected by this larger mount. And I think we see it with the 1.8S lenses. They are, in general, punching way above their relative F-mount weight, way above it. And thus, as Michael Bublé said, it's a new day, it's a new dawn, it's a new approach. And here we are, living it. In the F-mount era, a 1.4 lens was the most premium lens you could buy. And what we can see here with this presentation is the 1.4 lens is performing very well when you compare it to, say, F-mount. Absolutely. Maybe it's even better. And from my perspective, with the F-mount lenses that I own, which include the 24 1.4, the 50 1.4, and the 85 1.4, the latest versions of all of those, from my perspective, this lens performs better than all of those lenses. So the fact that we have a very affordable Z-mount lens that's better than previous 1.4 lenses, and that within itself is fantastic. And then it's something like half the price of a new one, depending on when you bought it, etc., etc., or whether they are on sale now, and so on. Like, there's so many factors at play, but it's something like half the price, but better. You still get the light gathering, you still get great results. If you want it to be a little bit sharper, then you stop it down a little bit, and for a lot of use cases and shooting styles, people are happy with that. But if you need the 1.4 of light gathering, it still looks great, and this video and these images are testament to that. Obviously, we can't forget the differences in coatings, which is having a little bit of an impact on flare and aberrating and so on. And so perhaps the 1.8S is the place where you should land. Because again, I think this video has shown if that is more where you're leaning, well, the differences are not that big. But if light gathering and small and the depth of field differences that the 1.4 offer, which again are small, but they are real, then maybe you go in the direction of the 1.4 35. It's really interesting. But to circle back to where we started, if we think about this real world style, we're looking at these two images here. Well, there's not that big a difference between them as we look at them like this, in Facebook, on your phone, maybe even as a small print, an 8x10 print. You're really not going to tell a lot of difference between them. And here they are side by side. If they weren't side by side, you would really struggle to tell the differences unless someone pointed them out to you. So there you have it from my perspective. I kind of think you can't go wrong with either. And I think you've got to decide whether you want the one that has the best possible image fidelity, which is the S, or the one that has the best light gathering and is cheaper, and that is the non-S. And I think that should be the approach. But in real world, that light gathering difference can be largely mitigated in post-production, and it's just a choice. All right, everybody. Well, thank you so much for being here. I'd love to know your thoughts, as always. Let's keep it super fabulous in the comments. And if this is your first time here, I would love to see you again. So please do subscribe, please share, and please like. All right. Bye for now.
And we're doing a bit of a comparison video. I really just want to show what it looks like real world. You know, we can talk a lot about differences between 1.4 and 1.8 and S and coatings. We can talk about all that stuff, but when you take it out into the real world and you're shooting, are you getting results? That's what it's about. Are you getting results? And